You know, every now and then you come across a story that is just so strange, so unbelievable, it sounds like fiction. This is one of those stories. It's a tale of unimaginable riches, absolutely staggering waste, and a collapse so total it feels like something out of a disaster movie. This is the tragic fortune of Nauru. And it all comes down to this one completely absurd question. How in the world did a tiny speck in the Pacific Ocean, an island made almost entirely of fossilized bird droppings, become the single wealthiest country on the entire planet per person, only to crash into bankruptcy, environmental ruin, and a health crisis that haunts it to this day? I know, it sounds impossible, but it really happened. So when the first European captain spotted Nauru way back in 1798, he called it Pleasant Island. And why wouldn't he? It looked lush, it was beautiful. For a long time, it was just this quiet little outpost. But under that pleasant green surface was a secret, a treasure that would change absolutely everything. And that treasure? Phosphate rock. Or, to put it more bluntly, guano. Yeah, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of years of bird droppings, baked by the sun, fossilized into a substance that happened to be incredibly rich in phosphates. And in the early 20th century, the world was desperate for fertilizer to fuel a huge agricultural boom. Suddenly, Nauru's ground was one of the most valuable things on Earth. See, they weren't sitting on a gold mine. The island was the mine. And then, Nauru gets its independence in 1968. It takes control of its own phosphate industry, and the money that started pouring in was, well, it was biblical. This wasn't just a boom, it was a full-blown fantasia of wealth that launched this tiny nation into a world that most of us can only dream of. Let's be really clear about what this means. In the 1970s and 80s, the average citizen of Nauru was on paper wealthier than anyone in Switzerland, richer than the oil sheiks in Saudi Arabia. They were number one. For one brief, shining, unbelievable moment, this little island was the richest place on the face of the earth. Now, they weren't totally naive. They knew the phosphate would run out eventually. So they set up the Nauru Phosphate Royalties Trust, basically a national savings account. And just look at the scale of this thing. By 1991, it was worth over $1 billion Australian dollars. This was supposed to be their forever fund, the nest egg that would secure their future. So what do you do with that kind of cash? Well, you live it up. Nobody paid taxes, healthcare, education, completely free. The government employed pretty much everybody, so you didn't really have to work. The stories from that time are legendary. The police force driving Lamborghinis on the island's single 18-kilometer road, the national airline, a Boeing 737, basically being used as a private taxi for shopping trips to Australia. It was a surreal, state-funded life of luxury. But here's the thing about a paradise like that. It came with a price. And this is where our story takes a dark, ominous turn. Because the very thing that made Nauru so unbelievably rich was also a slow-motion act of national suicide. This is the fatal flaw, right at the heart of the whole story. And it's not a metaphor. The phosphate was the island's topsoil. To get rich, they had to physically scrape away their own country, piece by piece, and ship it overseas. They were exporting their homeland. The environmental cost was just catastrophic. I mean, think about it. 80% of your country systematically carved up and removed. The lush, green interior that gave Pleasant Island its name was gone, replaced by a jagged, barren, and completely uninhabitable wasteland. And just as the island itself was being eaten away, the fortune built on top of it began to rot from the inside out. That billion-dollar forever fund became a piggy bank for mismanagement, for corruption, and for some of the absolute worst and most bizarre investments you could possibly imagine. The collapse was shockingly fast. In 1991, that trust is at its peak, $1.3 billion. Just 2 years later, they're throwing money at things like a London musical about Leonardo da Vinci that was a spectacular flop. By 2002, the fund's value had plummeted by almost 90%. And then, the final humiliation. In 2004, their crown jewel properties, like Nauru House in Melbourne, were seized and sold off to pay their massive debts. The party was officially over. But here's the really tragic part. This didn't have to happen. You just have to look at Nauru's neighbor, the tiny island of Tuvalu. They set up a similar trust fund, but with one critical difference. professional, international management, and oversight. And guess what? Their fund has been running successfully for decades. Nauru's collapse wasn't a failure of the idea, it was a total failure of wisdom and execution. So when all the money was gone, what was left? The scars. The inside of Nauru today is often called a moonscape. It's this bizarre, jagged terrain of limestone pinnacles sticking up from the ground. It's the bones of the island, left behind after the mining machines scraped everything else away. The soil is gone, the ecosystem is shattered. But the deepest scars of all were left on the people. With their land destroyed, they couldn't grow their own food anymore. So they became totally dependent on imported, processed junk food. The result? One of the worst public health disasters on Earth. The highest obesity rate in the world, over 40% of the population has type 2 diabetes. The very wealth that was meant to give them everything ended up costing them their health. And the final insult? A national debt of almost 870 million Australian dollars. For a tiny country with a tiny economy, that is just an incomprehensible burden. It's a debt 20 times bigger than their entire annual economic output. Now, Nauru's story, as extreme as it is sadly not unique. It is a perfect, tragic, textbook example of a strange economic paradox, a cautionary tale for any country that is blessed and maybe cursed with a ton of natural resources. It's called the resource curse, and it's this bizarre backwards phenomenon where finding oil or diamonds, or in this case, bird droppings, can actually make a country poorer in the long run. The sudden, easy money has a way of strangling every other part of the economy and inviting really bad decisions. The cycle is tragically predictable, and you can see it play out all over the world. First, a flood of easy money comes in. Then, the nation stops bothering to develop any other industries. Why would they? Third, the government, bloated with cash, gets corrupt or just makes terrible choices. And finally, when the resource runs out or the price crashes, the entire house of cards comes tumbling down. Nauru followed this path to the letter. And so, Nauru completed its incredible journey. From the richest country on Earth to a nation almost completely dependent on handouts from other countries, its future uncertain, and its land scarred forever. In the end, Nauru's story just leaves us with this one haunting question. It's the ultimate tragedy of peak and abyss, and it forces us all to ask, what is the true price of having all the wealth in the world, but without any of the wisdom to manage it?